From 2007 to 2009, middle-aged single men in Japan died in strange ways. At first, the police paid no attention to this, but just one case revealed the secret of the girl whom the press dubbed the Black Widow. Kanae Kijima was born on November 27, 1974, in Nakashibetsu, Japan. She was the eldest of 4 siblings. Although the names of her relatives were not made public, it is known that her father was a notary and her mother was a piano teacher. Kanae's parents, who came from wealthy families, tried to raise their children in favorable conditions, providing them with everything necessary as they grew up. However, as the firstborn, Kanae received special attention. Inspired by her mother's musical passion, she began developing her talent for playing the piano. For endless hours, Kanae honed her technique, and in a very short time, her abilities became evident. She even performed solo concerts on various stages and participated in prestigious competitions. But this was not her only interest. By the age of 9, she already knew how to cook, a quality that, in her mother's opinion, foreshadowed a good future as a wife. At the same time, to raise a worthy generation, her father established strict discipline at home, including limiting access to the television. Moreover, he practically gave them no money for personal expenses. Kanae easily coped with the first strict parental rules. She was active and an excellent student. However, dealing with the problem of limited access to money was much harder for her. The girl was inclined toward luxury and extravagance. Her father's strictness seemed unbearable to her, and soon she gave in to her instincts. In high school, she learned that her father kept $21,000 in cash at home and appropriated that money, which she then spent on clothes and exclusive brand handbags. As soon as her father found out about it, he punished Kanae by reducing her allowance. But contrary to her father's wishes, the girl did not regret it. On the contrary, she craved even more money. That's how she entered the intriguing world of dating. Gathering courage, Kanae began offering her company to elderly men in exchange for generous monetary compensation. In this context, she entered into a relationship with a man about 40 years old, whose identity is unknown. Under his influence, Kanae stole a bank book from one of her classmates. Then, together, they withdrew about $80,000 from it. When the authorities discovered them, they were arrested and brought to court. But since Kanae was still a minor, she received a suspended sentence. Despite this, she maintained excellent academic performance and graduated from high school. After that, she decided to move to Tokyo and enroll in the economics faculty. However, Kanae's interest in studies disappeared almost immediately, and she dropped out of college. Nevertheless, the girl realized that the city had enchanted her, and she didn't want to leave. To make ends meet, she took on several temporary and unstable jobs. One of them was working as a waitress in a fast food restaurant. Long hours, a heavy atmosphere, and low pay gave her no peace. She constantly worried about how to pay the rent for the apartment she hated because it was very modest. It was only a matter of time before Kanae acquired a new vile habit. She would go into a store, pretending to be an ordinary shopper, and steal cosmetics, books, and even money. And although she was caught several times, she managed to avoid arrest. These petty thefts were not enough for the level of life she aspired to. Then Kanae quit her job and decided to go to an escort club. In these establishments, services ranged from conversations and social meetings to more intimate interactions. Clients had the opportunity to choose a woman based on the provided information. But with a height of 1.50 meters and a weight of 105 kilograms, Kanae did not fit the conventional standards of beauty, so at first, she didn't attract much attention. But everything changed when she met a pimp named Takeuchi, who became her mentor. He taught her how to satisfy a man, inspired her to create an entire marketing strategy, and told her that she needed middle-aged or older men with low self-esteem who were not inclined to desire the women they really wanted. Realizing the value of her own skills and strengths, Kanae learned to establish emotional connections with her partners. She discovered that kindness and attention not only helped attract attention but also gratitude. Kanae became an expert in the art of seduction, skillfully reading people and understanding what they wanted. She discovered a new, unprecedented power in herself. At that time, Kanae took the pseudonym Sakura and under it invented a story that her father was a professor at a prestigious Tokyo university, the most elite educational institution in the country. In other cases, she presented herself as a nurse, a therapist, or a famous chef. All these fabricated stories created a captivating image. In this new role, one of her clients was Sadao Fukuyama. They met in February 2001 in a bar. Their communication was so intense that just 2 weeks later, they became lovers. But not only that, the man, previously distinguished by thrift and careful spending, made the mistake of trusting her, which Kanae shamelessly exploited. First, she invented a story about her parents dying in a plane crash and told him that she couldn't pay for her studies at a music school in Boston, where she supposedly studied. Sadao promised to cover all the expenses, and in return, she would fly from the USA once a month to meet him. The man eagerly awaited these visits, elegantly dressed and in love with the woman he considered his fiancée. And Kanae, taking advantage of the opportunity, drained most of his savings. After a few years, realizing that she had already exhausted all of Sadao's financial possibilities, Kanae ended their relationship. Clever and manipulative, she left no traces that would allow her to be found. When the man suspected he had been a victim of deception and tried to report her, there wasn't enough evidence to open a case. A few months after that, in August 2007, Sadao was late for work. Concerned, one of his colleagues went to his home and, upon entering, found him dead in the shower. When the news became public, Kanae transferred $50,000 from her former fiancé's funds to her bank account. Since the police could not establish the cause of death, the case was filed as a domestic accident. In 2008, Kanae became interested in the development of the internet in Japan. Analyzing the obvious advantages of the virtual world, she decided to change her strategy. She created a profile on major local social networks dedicated to finding partners under the pseudonym Sakura. In her description, she made it clear that she was looking for a serious relationship to start a family. Kanae perfectly understood the characteristics and needs of her potential victims. She knew that they were mostly men with high work and social loads, high incomes, and emptiness in their souls. Moreover, her strategy was to adapt to the situation and change arbitrarily depending on the preferences of her interlocutors. In this sense, she sometimes appeared as a young woman seeking true love, sometimes as a talented pianist, or even as the owner of a pet store passionate about cooking. It didn't take her long to become a real virtual celebrity. Her profile especially appealed to mature and elderly men who sought to give a worthy meaning to their old age. One of those who fell in love with Kanae was Takao Terada. The 53-year-old systems engineer lived in a suburb of Tokyo. Since his daily life boiled down to commuting home from work, the only people he communicated with were his mother and sister. In February 2008, Takao decided to try meeting someone online. 2 months later, Kanae sent him an invitation to chat and expressed hope for a future marriage. But first, she asked for financial help to cover some expenses. At the same time, Kanae posed as a nurse and caregiver for the elderly, responding to ads posted online. Kenzo Ando, an 80-year-old man, lived in the city of Noda, Chiba Prefecture. Although his income was small, he came from a respected family. His father was a famous artist from whom he inherited valuable works. Moreover, Kenzo suffered from some health problems. In their first communication, Kanae sent him a carefully retouched photo where only part of her body was visible. Kenzo was impressed and hired her as a caregiver and cook. Kanae not only prepared special dishes for him but was also ready to do anything to please him. In this way, she won his devotion and gratitude. A month later, she turned to Kenzo with a request for a loan, claiming the money was needed to pay for her university studies. Without thinking long, he gave her all his savings. At the same time, Kanae manipulated Takao's feelings, who, not hiding his emotions, told his mother about the exceptional attitude toward him from his fiancée and his plans to marry. Kenzo, in turn, was so imbued with trust in Kanae that he gave her a copy of his house key. But then the man fell into a coma and had to be hospitalized. In his absence, she entered and left the house, taking paintings with her that she then sold at high prices. Moreover, during this time, she deceived other men. In all cases, their names were not made public, but it is known that their ages ranged from 40 to 50 years. While Takao dreamed of a life together, Kanae already had a plan, and it was completely different. Having bought electric stoves online, she arranged to meet him at his home and, before the date, took sleeping pills with her. Having prepared dinner for both of them, she crushed several tablets and mixed them into the food. A few minutes later, Takao lost consciousness. Kanae dragged him into the room, closed all doors and windows, set up the stoves, placed coal on them and turned them on. Before leaving, Kanae transferred $121,000 from Takao's account to her own bank account. She also took the house keys and computer. 5 days later, on February 4, 2009, Takao's boss came to his home to check if everything was okay. Not getting an answer, he contacted the local authorities, and Takao's lifeless body was found. Analyzing the call history, investigators discovered that the contact list included only his mother, sister, and Kanae under the pseudonym Sakura. When the officers contacted Kanae, she reported that Takao was emotionally unstable and probably took his own life after experiencing heartbreak because he proposed to her, and she rejected him. In the absence of signs of violence, this version seemed quite logical to the police. As a result, the investigation was not continued. After coming out of the coma, Kenzo returned home. On the evening of May 15, 2009, Kanae visited him as usual, sat with him, and started preparing dinner. But this time, she added a special ingredient to his dish: sedative drugs. As soon as Kenzo fell asleep, she locked him in the room and repeated the procedure with the stoves. As with her other victims, before leaving, she accessed Kenzo's bank account and transferred $13,000 to her own. However, this time, one of the electric stoves caught fire, and the flames engulfed the entire house. Kenzo died instantly from fatal burns. The subsequent autopsy showed that the man had consumed an unusual amount of sleeping pills. Moreover, it turned out that he had never used such drugs before. But despite this, the authorities ruled his death an accident. Meanwhile, Kanae continued to run her blog, scouting for more and more new victims online. In July 2009, Yoshiyuki Oid stumbled upon her account and, unable to resist her charms, sent her a message. Yoshiyuki was a 41-year-old single man who, in addition to his salary at work, received income from renting family property. Moreover, he was very close to his mother, who lived in Fujimi. In their first communication, Kanae presented herself as a graduate student who still needed someone capable of supporting her materially, for whom she could marry. Intrigued by her words, Yoshiyuki invited the girl to meet. 2 days later, Kanae made Yoshiyuki understand that their relationship was getting stronger. They announced their engagement and began making wedding plans. Then, as part of the marriage agreement, she told him to transfer $30,000 to pay for her graduate studies. August 5, 2009, was marked on the couple's calendar as a special date. For this occasion, they planned a trip to Fujimi, where they intended to relax for 3 days. At the same time, the main reason for Yoshiyuki's excitement was the meeting of the two most important women in his life, his mother and Kanae. He was so thrilled that he wanted to share his happiness on his own blog and even announce the upcoming wedding. Kanae prepared a luxurious dinner in honor of the holiday and, unnoticed by Yoshiyuki, crushed various substances and sprinkled them into his food. At the end of the evening, they set off to their destination in a rented car. Arriving in Fujimi, the couple stopped in a parking lot. That's when the pills took effect on Yoshiyuki, and he sank into a deep sleep. After that, Kanae turned on the electric stove, lit the coal, and left the man locked in the car. Everything was as usual, but this time she made a mistake. Kanae forgot to leave the keys in the car. At that time, the only surveillance camera captured her leaving the parking lot. Then Kanae stole $35,000 from Yoshiyuki's account. When the police officers found the body, they first thought the man had taken his own life. But when it turned out that the car keys were nowhere to be found, this caused bewilderment. Almost immediately, this feeling grew into suspicion, since no note justifying Yoshiyuki's actions was found. Moreover, there were no traces of coal on his hands or clothes. No matches were found in the car either. According to Yoshiyuki's mother, her son had no apparent reasons for such a radical decision. In fact, he was more than happy with what life offered him, which the investigators confirmed by studying his blog. The autopsy showed that the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning, but it also revealed another detail: traces of tranquilizers in his body. Putting it all together, the police noticed that along with Yoshiyuki, 3 single men had died under similar circumstances that same year, which raised concerns and suspicions. When the police gained access to the surveillance camera footage, Kanae was exposed. However, the lack of additional cameras did not allow for the discovery of the most crucial evidence. But from that moment, all investigations focused on her. Then, when Yoshiyuki's computer was analyzed, it became clear how they had met. When the investigators contacted Kanae, she claimed that she had met Yoshiyuki the day before and left him alone. She also suggested that after her departure, the man might have done something to take his own life. But despite Kanae's statement, the police decided to begin a thorough investigation, gathering information on all the deaths and fraud cases linking her to the involved parties. On September 15, 2009, Kanae once again contacted another 43-year-old man on a virtual platform. However, his name remained unknown. In this case, the girl posed as an American student studying cooking in Japan. She also made him believe that she had family problems and financial difficulties with paying for her studies. In the end, Kanae told him that she was ready to give up everything, including her studies, to be with him. The next day, her lover sent her $17,000, and a few days later, Kanae moved into his house. At the same time, she purchased 2 electric stoves and then cut all the wires to the fire alarm in the house. Kanae's plan was thwarted when, on September 23, 2009, the groom's sister arrived at the residence with the idea of staying for a few days. The girl immediately began suspecting her new sister-in-law and tried to convince her brother not to continue the relationship. The matter worsened when he told her about the strange circumstances of their acquaintance and the money he had lent her. Then the sister decided to follow her intuition and told the police everything she knew. On September 25th, police officers arrived at the residence and arrested Kanae on charges of fraud. During the search of the room, they discovered that all the alarm devices had been disabled, which indicated that the girl was planning to carry out her characteristic procedure. During the search, various medications were also found, including several classes of drugs that cause drowsiness and a sedative effect. Moreover, the investigators found all the online purchases of stoves on her computer. These pieces of evidence allowed for establishing a direct connection to the previous cases. Thus, she was the main suspect in Yoshiyuki's death. In January 2010, as the investigation into the unusual deaths continued, Kanae was charged with fraud on several counts. A month later, she was charged with murder, specifically in Takao's death. Although no autopsy was conducted in this case, the charge was based on the lack of clear evidence of the cause of death, which led to an unusual situation. During the trial, she pleaded not guilty, claiming that the deaths of these people were accidents or the men's personal decisions. This corresponded to her defense strategy, which sought an acquittal by citing the lack of compelling evidence. In the absence of such direct evidence, as well as witnesses and confessions, the prosecution emphasized the importance of circumstantial evidence, such as her presence with the victims before their deaths, the similarity of the causes of death, the fact that all body analyses showed the men had consumed a drug that was also found with Kanae. The prosecution also stated that the girl had received large loans from her 3 victims and killed them to avoid repaying the money. According to the prosecutors, Kanae used coal and electric stoves to poison the 3 victims to confuse the authorities, since death by poisoning is a common way to take one's life in Japan. Finally, on April 13, 2012, the jury found Kanae guilty of murdering 3 men. As a result, the court sentenced her to death. Doomed to the death penalty, Kanae continued to run her blog. In it, she continued to talk about her experiences, and the fame she acquired even brought her financial support from some fans willing to improve her living conditions. Incredibly, one of the fans who provided her with financial support eventually married Kanae. This happened in 2015, and according to available data, the man was about 60 years old. However, after an accident, He became disabled, which made further material support impossible. Then Kanae divorced him. The time spent behind bars, Kanae also used to write memoirs, which were then published weekly in a women's magazine. At the same time, she published an autobiographical novel titled Praise. 100 days after the divorce, Kanae married again, this time to a real estate entrepreneur. But a few months later, they divorced. In 2018, Kanae decided to marry again. In this case, her chosen one was a 40-year-old man working in the publishing house responsible for publishing her book. While awaiting execution, Kanae continued to lead an active, controversial life, evoking both admiration and condemnation. Friends, what do you think about this story? Write your opinion in the comments, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel and other social networks. You can find links to them in the description under this video. We're not saying goodbye.